Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for attending our fire services testing process and maintenance strata webinar this evening, where we will be walking through a number of different things in relation to the annual fire safety process. We'll be walking through what is AS 1851-2012. Now, we did do a webinar last year explaining this. We have some subtle changes to the content this evening, and obviously highlighting AS 1851 again to all of the owners in attendance. Also, we'll talk through what baseline data is and obviously how the new fire safety regime or Australian standards coming out next year or mandatory next year will affect your strata scheme. And of course, we will allow any questions. So feel free to use the Q&A at the top of the Zoom screen there. Fire any questions. I'm solo in this webinar, so I will stop throughout to see what questions we have pertaining to what it is that I'm talking about. But failing that, we'll have a question time at the end. So my name is Andrew Tunks. I'm the Learning and Development Director here at Netstrata, and I'm really glad that you've decided to join me this evening in this webinar. So let's explain some fire safety measures first. Some really basic ones on the screen there. So no doubt you're aware that if you live in your strata scheme, or even if you have it as an investment, you're probably well aware that each year fire inspectors will come out to your apartment, look inside your apartment. If you have fire measures, so things like door closers on your front door, smoke alarms within your apartments, they'll be looking at the door frame, the actual door, to make sure that they're the fire rating tags and all that sort of gear is all present and everything works. Around the common areas, they'll be looking at things like fire collars. So at the top of the screen there, you've got an example of a fire collar. So basically penetrations in concrete slabs are supposed to have fire collars around the pipework and like a intumescent material within that collar that expands when it's hot, so that obviously the flames and the smoke don't go up via those penetrations in the slab to other levels within the building. Nice simple one on the right hand side there. You've got our fire extinguisher. Down the bottom left, fire panel. I'll explain a little bit more about fire panels in a couple of slides time. Sprinkler systems, diesel pumps. So if you've got sprinklers or hydrants, you'll have a diesel pump somewhere located in your building in a fire control room, and effectively its job is obviously to pressurise those systems so that there's obviously water there when needed. Emergency lights there, so it could be the running man exit light or the other type you see in that little photo there, little white circle there, little emergency light. And on the right hand side, we've got an example of a fire hydrant system. Moving on, fire doors. Another example of a fire system being a fire damper. So a damper is basically a mechanism that closes to obviously contain the smoke in an area in a mechanical ventilation system. Also got fire shutters there, fire windows, fire rated windows, smoke and heat vents. So these are all common things we see in strata land. Next one here is the automatic fire detection and alarm system. So I said a couple of seconds ago, I'll explain what a fire panel does. So effectively, this is it. So you'll have a fire alarm control panel, which you can see in the diagram on the left-hand side in the middle there. You'll have some active fire measures which detect, smoke or a fire, and effectively that triggers the fire panel. And that obviously in turn flashes a nice little bright LED out the front of the building so the fire brigade know where the panel is, can activate sprinklers if that's throughout the building and alarms, and generally has a mechanism to release the front door so the fire brigade can come in. They would then look at the panel. The panel would then indicate where the fire is through the building using a zone block plan. So the indicator panel might say, fire zone 2, the fire brigade would look at the plan and work out where zone 2 is, and off they go to extinguish the fire. All right, so we'll be talking about passive fire, and I thought I'd explain the difference between passive versus active fire measures before we sort of get stuck into the annual fire safety statement process here. So basically, the main difference between active and passive fire protection systems is that active systems are designed to put out fires, while passive ones are designed to prevent them from starting in the first place. So an example that we've got on the screen there, on the left-hand side are our active measures, on the right-hand side are our passive measures. So on the left-hand side, we've got an example of a heat alarm at the top there, top circle. We've got a fire alarm system, fire extinguisher down the bottom there, and on the right-hand side, the passive systems are basically the wall systems, etc. Obviously, stopping the fire from going from one compartment to another. So we will sort of talk a little bit more about passive fire, but in essence, passive fire protection safeguards do not require any action in the event of a fire, while active fire protection requires some form of activation to activate it, whether that's manual or automatic. All right, so moving on to one of the main purposes of our webinar this evening is to explain the annual fire safety statement process, which the acronym AFSS, you might have heard of that. To start off with, let me just explain that an AFSS or annual fire safety statement basically applies to all classes of buildings except for 1A and 10 at present time. So if you look at my little diagrams on the screen there, you'll see that 1A is a freestanding house. And 10 are basically, private garages, sheds, bush shelters, etc. Every other class of building requires an annual fire safety statement. So if you live in a residential apartment building or office block or shop, cafe, potentially you're going to work in, those sorts of buildings, they all require an annual fire safety statement. And moving on to the process, or a little bit of the roadmap that we've got here. So basically, the annual fire safety statement process is quite a detailed process. Now, we have a fire safety team here at Netstrata. We've got about 6 administrative staff that their full-time role is administering the annual fire safety statement process. Effectively, what happens is when a building is brand new, they're built according to the, obviously plans and specifications, a fire safety statement. I'll show you a copy of one of those in a few slides' time. Is obviously given to the council with obviously the fire measures that are in the building, and those fire measures have to be tested and inspected each year and signed off that the building is compliant. Now, effectively what happens with that is each time you sign the annual fire safety statement, as an owners corporation, you're signing off that the building is compliant, and effectively that is then the anniversary for the next time that you have to sign off. So as the name implies, it's an annual fire safety statement, so we're having to get checks each year. So effectively what happens, if we look at point number 1 on the screen, we generally confirm the contractor. We look at the last AGM and obviously, if they've approved a particular contractor, we reach out to them. 4 months prior to the annual fire safety statement due date, we issue letters to the owners and occupants giving them notice. And effectively at the 3rd month prior to the due date, the initial fire inspection is carried out by the fire contractor. And there's an important reason why that timing is 3 months prior. I'll explain that in just a moment. 2 months from the due date, we arrange any corrective action repair work. So you'll hear me talk about cars. I'm not talking about, Ford Falcons. I'm talking about corrective action reports. And we write to lot owners for internal repair approval. So that is where, potentially the smoke alarm's failed or there's an issue with the door furniture. Maybe they've got an illegal deadlock or something like that that needs to be removed and replaced. And then we've got point number 5 on the screen, the due dates, where we submit the AFSS to council. So basically 3 months from the inspection date, a full re-inspection is required. Now, if we are delayed, for example, with submitting the annual fire safety statement to council saying that the whole building is compliant, if we go past if the submission date goes past 3 months from which the building was inspected, a full re-inspection has to occur. So the timing is very important. You want to do the inspection pretty much bang on 3 months prior to the due date, so you've got as much time as you need to correct anything that's wrong in the building. So the fire corrective action report items, you might need to get quotes, you might need extended periods of time to get into apartments and fix things, etc. So you want the biggest window possible, but you've just got to make sure that you keep that tight. The annual fire safety statement is submitted no later than 3 months prior to the due date. All right, so the annual fire safety statement, this is an internal document that I'm more than happy to share with you. So our 5-month process timeline. So basically, we start our annual fire safety statement process 5 months prior to the due date. So here what we're doing is we're cleansing data in our systems. We're creating lists for all of the contractors. So it's not only the fire contractor that knocks on your door and checks your smoke alarm, lifts. If you've got elevators in your building, we need compliance certificates from them. Mechanical ventilation, so if you've got mechanical ventilation in your basement or throughout your building, that has to be obviously certified and checked, etc. Any alarm monitoring, so if you've got a fire panel that I explained to you earlier, effectively that has to have a monitoring system. We need to obviously get certificates, make sure that is operating effectively, and a to-do list for any of the items that we have to do. Effectively 4 months out, we're requesting the lift compliance certificates. We're getting the mechanical air contractors out to the building. We're requesting alarm monitoring compliance certificates, and we're following up just to make sure that obviously everything is, in order. 2 to 3 months out, obviously we do the inspections. Any of the corrective action report work that gets identified. Usually we're obtaining quotations and organising that work and liaising with the committees, etc., where need be. 1 month out, we're obviously making sure that everything is on track, that the corrective action report work is underway, chasing up any outstanding quotes or any outstanding items. And then we're really planning on that due date. We do try not to submit too early because that then becomes the anniversary for the following year. So we work very closely to that due date that's given to us by the local council. Now, this little table that I've got on the screen is just to identify the frequency of inspections. So the annual inspection is where the fire contractor inspects the majority of the fire measures. However, some measures require more frequent servicing and testing. So if you have a look on the screen there, basically this is as per Australian Standard 1851, and we've got some items there that are inspected yearly. So we're looking at things like your emergency lifts, your fire dampers, fire control centres and rooms, your fire shutters, your fire windows, etc. And then you've got items that the fire contractor would have to inspect 6 monthly or even monthly. So things like your fire panels are inspected monthly, etc. So if you've got these particular measures in the building, the fire company servicing the building has to adhere to these frequencies. Moving on, a corrective action repair. So basically there's, under AS 1851, there's critical and non-critical repairs, which are identified during the inspections on site. Now, it's very common to get an annual corrective action report, noting the things from the major inspection that occurs. And also it's quite common to get a biannual. So at the 6-month time is when, as the earlier screen indicated, there's a large number of items that are inspected as well, so there might be defects or issues with those items. So those corrective action reports are sent through to the strata manager and obviously dealt with the strata committee, etc. Now, just to give you some examples of the sorts of things that we find coming up in terms of defects and corrective action items, I'll give you some examples now. So here we've got fire system defect examples, and I'm starting with passive fire. So I'll explain these photo by photo, but as I alluded to before, passive fire is to prevent a fire from spreading initially. Now, the photo on the left-hand side is basically a ceiling space of an apartment. Now, what you'll see where the arrow is pointing, we've got these blue fire collars, which are supposed to seal the pipework as it goes through, in this case, a brick wall, and there's no brick wall. So obviously the collar's there, but it's not going to really do much if there's no wall. So in this particular example, we actually had to get quotes to put a block wall in that ceiling space. On the right-hand side of the photo is basically one apartment. On the left-hand side of the photo is another apartment. So effectively, if one apartment was on fire, it could burn through the roof and then spread to the next apartment through the roof space. So part of this Australian Standard 1851 is ensuring that inspectors are looking in these areas where previously they didn't. The hole in the center, hole in the meter room, so the photo in the center of the screen there, effectively a nice big hole in the wall is not going to do much if one room is on fire. It's obviously going to spread to the next room. On the right-hand side, no fire collars. So here, instead of having that intumescent material or that fire collar, basically what they've done is I call it plop. It looks like just sand and cement mix that's just sort of plopped around the hole under heat. No one knows whether that would crack and remove and obviously create some sort of hole for fire to obviously travel through to the next unit. Here we've got exposed ceiling of a meter room on the left-hand side. So in this example, this is a meter room, and you could imagine if they had electrical fire in a meter room, flames might get carried away and might actually go north up through the ceiling space and travel, burn the cables and spread to floors above. So that's a clear defect there. Fire collars concreted over, so they're not going to do much of a job if they're concreted. And on the right-hand side, you can see a wall gap. So this is an interesting one where they've actually put a fire collar in, as you can see. I'll just move my little cursor here. Got a fire collar there. That's perfect. Well done. But it's right next to a big hole. So that's not going to really do much in the event of a fire. Obviously, fire is going to spread quite easily through that hole. So there, some passive fire examples. Some other sort of examples of fire defects that we see come up on corrective action reports are things like expired or defective smoke alarms. So smoke alarms tend to have a lifespan of 10 years. They need to basically be replaced after that period of time. Defective heat alarms. We also see missing signage. So signage, things like missing block plans or missing signs, particularly around fire extinguishers. So as you may or may not know, a fire extinguisher is used for particular types of fires. So there's various different types of fire extinguishers, and there'll be a sign above it, just like my little picture on the bottom right there, and that tells you what fire that particular type of extinguisher is useful for. So it might be useful for electrical equipment, or there might be other types of fires that it's useful for. So if that sign's missing, then obviously the user doesn't know whether they can actually use that to put out the fire that was present. Failed emergency lights, so they tend to have a 90-minute lifespan for their backup battery. If they fail, essentially the fire contractor usually recommends that they be replaced. Sprinkler pump failures, very important to have your sprinkler pumps operational. Now the photo there where we've got a pump set, we've got a row of batteries there. There's quite a lot that could go wrong with our pumps. The batteries might have failed, so they might need battery replacement. They might have run out of fuel. There might be mechanical issues with the pumps themselves. So obviously we would get that quoted and the repairs taken out. Fire panel errors. So often the fire panels have errors. Also, it might be an older building where the fire panel needs replacement. Not too uncommon. Missing block plans. So as you can see, the fire panel located on the photo on the top right there. If a fire brigade officer was to attend and let's say that block plan was missing, they wouldn't know where to go to put the fire out. So obviously the indicator panel would tell them what zone the fire is, and if there's no zone block plan, then obviously they can't work out where the fire is. Now, where your fire panel is in a lobby or a foyer, often they do get removed or stolen. It's very expensive to replace them. Basically, if we don't have an original copy, basically a specialist contractor would have to go out and work out basically which zone services which area, which can be time consuming and costly. So in the event that you do have a fire panel that's in a foyer, where we really strongly recommend that they be stored in some sort of protective case or lockable cabinet or something so that they can't be removed, and also the copies are made in the event that they are stolen. Expired fire extinguishers, so much like a smoke alarm, an extinguisher needs to be changed in certain intervals. Fire pump failures, we see this from time to time. Fire door defects, so that's quite common for apartment doors. So if you're living in a residential high-rise, your front apartment door would be a fire door. And you can work out if your door is a fire door by looking at the spine of the door. You'll see a door tag, which gives you the indication of the fire rating of that door. There should also be a matching tag on the frame as well. And if either of those, the frame or the door, are defective, then obviously they need to be rectified. Common sorts of door defects, we see people putting illegal deadlocks on the door, which require a key to exit. So in the event of a fire, a compliant deadlock allows you to open it by hand, not having to fumble around looking for a key. So if that is the case, you'll generally find that we're writing to you to say, hey, your door lock is not approved, we need to get it replaced. Now, giving you some examples of passive fire defect repairs, or what they commonly do. So I've shown you quite a number of photos of the penetrations and the holes which were inappropriate. If that is the case, you can see some photos here. When I train our staff on this, I often say it looks like a Sara Lee cake. I think that photo there looks, it looks very cake-like to me, but it's not cake. It's a fire-rated material with then obviously the pipe work has like a fire lagging around it. And you can see a bit clearer in the middle photo there, the material on the inside, and it's like foil wrapped. So that's generally what they do in those cases. Moving on, fire safety schedules. So as I alluded to a couple of slides ago, each building will have a fire safety schedule, and effectively it identifies the fire measures that are present in that building. Now there's quite a number. I mean, there's over 30 different fire measures that you could have in your building, and not every building has every fire measure. So it just depends on your particular building and whether the fire safety contractor needs to check certain measures depending if they're present or not. So fire safety schedules are obviously vital for ensuring buildings meet minimum fire safety standards by specifying existing and proposed fire safety measures. So fire safety statements are issued by council, certifiers or consent authorities during various building processes, including development consent, complying development certificates, construction certificates, or fire safety orders. So in essence, what that means is when a building is brand new and it's getting built, obviously, those authorities, councils or certifiers, etc., would specify what needs to be in that building, depending on, the code, the zoning, all that sort of thing. And effectively, fire safety orders, what they are is where a council require a building to remedy an issue with the fire system or uplift what is in the building. Sometimes you see that applied to older buildings where they don't have certain modern fire technologies. They'll require those to be installed in the building. Fire safety statements must address the entire building and outline the minimum performance standards for each fire safety measure. Now, starting from August 1, 2023, there was a new fire safety statement template, and that was basically a prescribed form provided by the New South Wales government. So although existing buildings may continue using their current format unless a new schedule is obviously needed. All right, moving on to what is Australian Standard AS1851-2012. So as I alluded to at the beginning of this webinar, we did do a very similar webinar this time last year explaining AS1851. Now, AS1851 is basically coming into effect in February 2026. So it was supposed to come in February 2025, and that has been delayed by approximately 12 months. So schemes need to be compliant by this date. Now, what does that mean? Effectively, AS1851 sets out the routine servicing requirements for fire protection systems and equipment in Australia. So the standard is regularly updated and provides a framework to ensure that systems are working and are keeping people and buildings safe. So some sort of key notes for owners in this webinar this evening is there's sort of two streams to this AS1851. So the first stream is accreditation of the fire safety assessors. So that's all well and truly underway. And the second thing is a mandatory routine servicing requirement. So obviously building owners must ensure that essential fire safety measures in class 1B to 9 buildings are maintained in accordance with that Australian standard. So while most fire safety practitioners use AS1851 as best practice, these requirements have not been enforceable until now. So basically what we're seeing is that a lot of top tier fire contractors had been using the AS1851 standards as their standards as they go and test and inspect a building, but there are plenty that were not, which means that they're really not lifting their standard of servicing to what the government feel is important. The main areas which owners should be aware of under AS1851 are number one, documentation and reporting. So the standard restructured documentation requirements to assist regulatory use. So this includes service records and reporting. Baseline data, we're going to talk about that in some detail in a few slides' time, but it basically services as a reference point or benchmark against which the condition and performance of the fire protection system can be compared during fire inspections and routine services. And I'll give you some examples in a few slides' time of that. Defect classifications and non-conformance. So the standard distinguishes between critical defects, non-conformance, and non-critical defects. Furthermore, routine service requirements, and I'll give you an example of a checklist in a few slides' time of what inspectors are required to check and ensure as we go through the webinar. We'll show you that. But basically, the routine service technical requirements have been critically appraised and refined, including changes in frequencies and application instructions. So specific intervals for inspections, testing and preventative maintenance. The standard mandates specific intervals for these items, as I showed you in the table, whether it is an item that needs to be inspected annually or biannually or monthly, whatever the case may be. So owners should familiarise themselves with these intervals to ensure that obviously the building is compliant. Precautions and defect rectification. So the standard highlights the procedures which need to be followed in order to rectify identified defects. Now, as I mentioned, postponing the implementation. Basically, we've been working to the original date for AS1851, which is February 2025. So in most cases, having fire contractors prepare sites for the increase in the Australian standards. So about 18 to 24 months ago, we basically started to inform all of our fire safety contractors that we did want them to uplift their inspections to that AS1851 standard to basically give us time to prepare the buildings for the increased inspection regime, and obviously start looking in those areas. Like I showed you some photos of the roof space of apartments or electrical rooms, and if there are any passive defects that need to be made aware of. So just a note here, AS1851 will become mandatory February 2026. All right, so when the standard comes into effect in February 26 for servicing fire protection systems in buildings, buildings that have not previously adhered to this standard may face several challenges. So accredited fire safety practitioners are in the process of undergoing further training to ensure that their inspection standards are correct and uniform across the industry. So a couple of key takeouts. Now, what will the uplift mean? The uplift will basically mean that 100% access to all apartments will be required to complete an AS1851-2012 inspection. Now, that is quite a task. The bigger the building you live in, the more difficult it's going to be to get into every single apartment. Notwithstanding that, if there are any defects within the apartments, like smoke alarms that don't work or doors that are faulty, door closers that don't work, obviously we need to get back a second, possibly a third time to fix items within apartments. So it can take quite a considerable amount of time. Fire safety equipment that has previously passed testing may not under AS1851. Now, equipment such as pumps and sprinklers will require specific interval testing and servicing, and definitely there will be an uplift in servicing those items. Baseline data. So walking you through what baseline data is. First of all, baseline data may be required to verify the result of a routine service activity required by an applicable service schedule. Baseline data required by this standard is limited to that necessary to verify the routine service activity result and prescribed by the regulations, codes and standards. I'm going to show you a few examples of that. So in other words, baseline data is the initial set of data collected to represent the starting point of a fire system's performance. So if you're in a new building, we should have received the documentation for your building from the original developer. Now we keep that on file, and that some of that data that they give us in the Section 16 handover documents when the buildings are brand new is the baseline data. It might be asset registers or plans or specifications. So we certainly keep that and give that to the fire contractor servicing the building. So it is very important. Obviously, as I said, serves as a reference point for future inspections, maintenance, and assessments. So non-conformance, obviously, to be rectified as soon as practicable prior to the next yearly condition report. So what constitutes baseline data? Basically, system design specifications, installation details, commissioning reports of certain fire systems, initial performance results, configuration settings, also lists of items with their equipment, make, model, and specifications, fire engineered performance solutions. So often fire engineered performance reports are given when a building is brand new, and they're given to us basically to show that where alternative measures have been used to meet certain fire requirements. So I'll give you an example. Let's say there was a requirement for an apartment to be no greater than 15 meters from a fire escape. And let's say your apartment is 20 meters from that fire escape. The fire engineered report or engineer might have specified that, hey, if we put a sprinkler system into the building, we can actually, stretch the distance of which the apartment is from the fire escape. So there, a fire engineered performance solution is one that has been created specific for the building to basically make the building comply. So they might have met a requirement a different way, basically. Asset registers detailing the location and details of each specific fire measure. And here's an example of an asset register. So this is a passive fire register. So you can see this is a really good one. We've got the penetration number listed there. We've got the floor or level. We've got the location, the element type, the fire rating, FRL. We've got the manufacturer system used, the test report to obviously reference, and a photo example of that system. So you can understand where a fire contractor might say, they need this baseline data in order to be able to, test the building. Obviously, if they're walking through the building and they have an asset register like this, they're going to be able to tick them off and obviously walk themselves through the building, making sure that everything is in order. So what if there is no baseline data? So initial assessment and documentation can be put together, consultation with experts. So often they create it. So it might be an expensive exercise, but nonetheless, the data can be put together. So doing asset registers, making notations of models, makes, etc. of fire equipment throughout the building. Might need, retrofitting or upgrades done to the building. Obviously, the creation of new baseline data, as I mentioned, regular maintenance and documentation, and compliance and certification efforts. So just on the right-hand side, an example of baseline data for sprinkler and hydrant systems. So it says here, the following are examples of baseline data information. So a statement detailing the design standard of the system, including date of publication of any approved exceptions. Point B, documentation required by the approved design, such as commissioning documentation as detailed in the relevant fire system design, installation and commissioning standard. Point C, table of any changes perhaps to the approved design, nominating the date, scope of the change and persons performing the change, etc. And the list sort of goes on there. So that's just one fire measure. Now, just to show you why baseline data is important, here is an AS1851 checklist for fire detection systems. So under AS1851, that's basically the standard that the fire inspector needs to test the building to. Now, each fire measure has a checklist of items that need to be signed off by the technician in order for them to sign off that the building is compliant. So here you can see from this table, and this is just pulled straight out of the Australian standards. This is one of multiple pages for the fire detection system checklist. And you can see here, point 3.10, occupant warning system. Now, this is where the inspector has to measure and record the sound pressure level from at least one reference point for each amplifier used through the building. The next point, the alarm acknowledgement facility, so test not less than 20% of the alarms in the building. The next point, alarm investigation facility, test the alarm investigation facility if enabled and check that it functions correctly. The next one, check the condition of the batteries. The next point, smoke alarms and heat alarms, check those. Service life, make some comments about that. And then 3.16, it says baseline data, Confirm the baseline data is accurate. Now, if the building doesn't have all the documentation of the baseline data, or basically how the fire systems were designed, installed, and implemented, then how is the fire contractor going to sign off on that particular item? So often we're finding that fire technicians that can't find that data are coming to us and saying, "Hey, do you have, any asset registers? Do you have any plans or specifications for the building? Can you help us?" If we can't get them, often it's searching at the local council, so doing a document search at the local council to see if we can obtain them there. Failing all of that, it is engaging the fire safety contractor to perhaps create that baseline data and the asset registers, etc., for the building. Now, moving on, how does this affect our schemes here? So effectively, the preparation has already begun. We've been gathering baseline data for all the buildings under management, filing them, putting them in our document management system. We've been reviewing defect lists and obviously communicating that with the various strata committees. Now, where there are passive fire defects, often they're quite expensive measures to rectify, things like fire dampers, like the photos of, holes in walls, having to brick things up, having to put fire collars in or seal penetrations in slabs, so they can be quite expensive. Obviously, we're getting multiple tenders and referring that back to strata committees. We've started having sites inspected AS1851 style, so effectively using those checklists that are in the standard. Budgeting for increased expenses. So you might have noticed in your annual general meeting budget in the administration fund particularly that we are trying to just get everyone prepared by budgeting a bit more just in case there are increased expenses come fire inspection time. Also reviewing bylaws to recover costs from lot owners whereby renovations has caused fire defects. So I'll give you an example is in apartments where they've used those IXL like heat lamps, for example. We've had a number of those being defective where they've just been installed and they haven't been installed correctly, or you might have had top floor units put in LED downlights in their ceiling space and they don't have the appropriate lighting covers in the roof space, and in some cases we've seen insulation in the roof gone straight over the top of downlights, which obviously could cause a fire. So if that's basically been a renovation from an individual lot owner, then why should the owners corporation pay to rectify it? That cost should really be passed back to the person who did the renovation at the time. All right, so that is quite a lot of information to take in. Now I'll just have a little scan and see what questions we have on the Q&A there. All right, so feel free to throw any questions you like in there and I'll try my best to get to them. All right, so I've got a question here. How does AS1851 deal with passive fire compliance if only one side of a penetration is accessible? Can a building owner still receive an AFSS if one side hasn't been verified in 10 plus years? Very difficult. I'd say that would be a case-by-case basis. If we can't get into a neighbouring apartment, it's going to be time, I would imagine, for orders for access to try and get access to various apartments to obviously make sure that we can check the fire safety measures. Thank you for that question. All right, I think that's about it, actually. We've had a few questions we've been able to answer on the run. All right, well, thank you so much for your time. That is the conclusion of the webinar. Feel free to email me any other specific questions that you have. I think my email address is on the invite for this webinar. Oh, no, we've got a couple more questions fired in here. All right, we've got here, on average, what are the general concerns for townhouses or villas? Good question. Generally speaking, for townhouses and villas, if they are adjoining townhouses, a concern, I have seen some buildings with no fire breaks in the ceiling space between one townhouse and another townhouse. If they're freestanding, probably the concern would just be around that roof space and things like downlights, IXL lights in the ceiling space, but they wouldn't have as many AS1851 concerns, I wouldn't imagine, as a high-rise strata scheme would. Obviously, they don't have as many fire measures as high-rise or medium rise. All right, no other questions? Well, thank you everybody so much for attending our webinar this evening. We will circulate a recording to those owners that couldn't make it this evening. Again, thank you so much. Feel free to reach out if you've got any further questions. Thank you so much.